Dale Allison is the Richard J. Dearborn Professor of New Testament Studies at Princeton Theological Seminary. He's a Matthean scholar. His 3-volume commentary on Matthew, that is co-authored with W.D. Davies, is the gold standard when it comes to commentaries on Matthew. Professor Allison has also written a commentary on James. He's written several books on the historical Jesus. He wrote a nice little book that I'm pretty fond of. Its title is Night Comes, Death, Imagination, and the Last Things. You can just really see his authenticity come through with that. And I can remember finishing up that book. My wife and I, we go to bed kind of early and we just read. Each of us just reads our own things. And I was finishing up your book that night, and just the last page of that, I just said, Deb, you got to hear this. This is exactly how I feel. And it was just pretty cool, just like that book. His 2000 book, Resurrecting Jesus, is something that really inspired to me. I was reading this as part of my doctoral research, and I can remember just being really excited to read it. A pretty challenging book, one of the best books written on the resurrection, in my opinion. He's got a new book coming out, Resurrecting Jesus. It's called Arguing Resurrection, Apologetics, Criticism, History. It's right at around 286,000 words, excluding the bibliography and indices. It's a pretty large book. My book, a large book on the resurrection, is about the same size with the bibliography and indices. So his is a little bit longer. Darn it, Dale, why did you have to do it like that? Before we launch into our interview, I want to offer some additional comments about Professor Allison. And I think if all the New Testament scholars in the world were polled and asked to name who they think, in their opinion, are the top 5 New Testament scholars in the world, I think the name Dale Allison would appear on those lists more than any others. He is a preeminent historian. His work is scholarship at its finest. Professor Allison is not an evangelical, so for those evangelical viewers, he may say some things that will be troubling to you. I want to confess that when he asked me to read his manuscript, and as I was going through the manuscript, there were some occasions in it that made me feel uneasy, theologically speaking. So we can expect some of these things, but he does back up his views well. And if you're a skeptic viewing this, you're not off the hook either, because he says some things that are going to make you feel uncomfortable, at least if you're open-minded to some things. One of the things I admire most about Dale is his authenticity, his honesty, his transparency about his beliefs, his views, his biases. And I have to admit that when I was reading through his 2005 book, I was already in a state where I just was, as a second guesser myself, and a triple guesser and quadruple guesser. I'm in this issue, which is one of the most important questions we can ask, whether Jesus rose from the dead. I was trying to harness my own biases, and I just found his book and seeing him doing the same. I just found that inspirational, because it's extremely rare to find a scholar, a historian these days, that recognize that they have their own biases, much less attempt to harness them and to give a fair-minded investigation. So it's a real privilege to have my friend here and to talk about his new book coming out, Arguing Resurrection. Professor Allison, welcome.
Welcome. Hi, Mike. Thank you very much for your comments. You're too kind.
Well, no, those comments are well-deserved, but thanks anyway. So, look, there's going to be a number of viewers who, if they're not New Testament scholars, are serious students of the New Testament, graduate students in New Testament studies. They may they may not be familiar with you. So tell us a little about yourself. I'm curious, tell us about your childhood. Where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like?
So I was born and raised in Wichita, Kansas. Grew up in the 1960s. My parents were from small Kansas towns and grew up in the Depression. They were not academics, and they never pushed me in an academic direction. In fact, they never pushed me in any direction at all. They expected me to go to college, but they never suggested any vocation. And actually, growing up, I never gave any thought to any vocation whatsoever. I certainly never thought I'd be a teacher when I grew up. Anyway, I had an innocent, happy childhood, and I was thinking about this recently. I think the two most disappointing events in my childhood where I didn't make the seventh grade basketball team, and the St. Louis Cardinals lost the 1968 World Series to the Detroit Tigers. So that tells you how innocent and happy I was. I actually think I was just walking around in a sort of dream state for my early life. I was an average student, didn't make it to the accelerated classes till ninth grade, and I wasn't a reader until junior high school. My wife tells me that she carried around books from the time she could carry them around. She was always reading, just as she is always reading now. I didn't spend my first 10 years reading books at all. And I remember in junior high school, I first fell in love with books when I read Lord of the Rings and then a biography of Alexander the Great. And those two books sucked me in, and I wanted to read more books. And that's when the book thing started.
Well, that's interesting. You say you weren't a great student. I was a gifted student in school. When they gave me a C, it was a gift. Hey, I'm curious. You mentioned about the Cardinals. Man, I was a big baseball fan growing up. I grew up in Baltimore, so man, we had a fantastic Baltimore Orioles team in the '60s and the '70s. So, did you like baseball?
I loved baseball, and for a couple of years, I listened to every single St. Louis Cardinal game. I had an old transistor radio, and Harry Carey and Jack Buck were the old announcers back then, and I listened to every single game.
Oh, that's awesome. I tease some folks. I'll say that, football's a great sport too for entertainment between baseball seasons, and and then soccer is a great sport for children in third world countries where they don't have baseball. So, all right. So when did you become interested in religious matters?
Well, I grew up in a liberal Presbyterian church, and it was a liberal Presbyterian church. I remember Sunday school sometime in the 1960s making little mud huts, villages of Vietnam. So it was all social gospel, pretty much. My dad was a deacon. My mom sang in the choir, but religion wasn't the center of their lives. But I do think I always had the religious bug or gene or whatever you want to call it. I do have a distinct memory of when I was 10 years old, talking to myself one night before going to bed and saying, Allison, when you grow up, you're going to want to know about your religious life as a youngster. And so take a mental note, write this down. This is how you are praying this evening right now when you're 10 years old. And so I know exactly what I was doing when I was 10 years old. But the major event in my life took place when I was 16 years old. And I was in my parents' backyard one summer evening under the Kansas night sky. And something remarkable happened. And I suppose people would call it a mystical experience, which means it's ineffable, which means I can't tell you anything about it and make any sense at all. But I did believe then, and I still believe now, that I ran into God or God ran into me in some way that has never happened before or since. And that turned my life upside down. And what I instantly started doing was talking to everybody about God, because that's the word that I had for this thing that had happened to me. And in my time and place, which is Wichita, Kansas, early 1970s, the only people who want to talk about God were evangelical Christians. So I actually did end up in a very conservative church for probably about a year or a year and a half, my senior year in high school, and the very, very beginning of college. I didn't, to use a term, fall away, but I didn't attend church very regularly after that through most of college and most of graduate school. I was just too busy doing other things.
Wow. So when did you decide you wanted to be a New Testament scholar for a career? And what led you to that decision?
Well, when I went off to college, I really had no vocational goal, which is why I went to the state university just down the street. Look, here's what happened, Mike. When I began talking about God, my best friend, who was a skeptic and is still a skeptic today, began to ask me questions. He began to ask me questions about the Bible. How do you know anything in it is true? How could you believe in hell? How can you believe in a soul, given what modern science says? What do you do about Genesis 1? And modern science, what do you do about all the religions of the world? Everybody believes different things, and so on. All of the modern questions, the questions of the last 3 centuries, he began to ask me. And I didn't have the answers. And it was very soon the case that his questions were my questions and his doubts were my doubts. And my response to that, since I didn't have the answers, was to read. And I just read from that point everything that was relevant. So I started reading history. I started reading philosophy. I started reading modern theology. I started reading science. I started reading parapsychology and its critics. I just read everything I could get my hands on. And the only thing I wanted to do was figure things out. So when I went to college, I had no interest in anything except figuring things out. So when I got there, it was orientation day, first day of college. Somebody handed me a piece of paper and said, fill out your major and minor. I really didn't know what a major was. And he told me, and I said, well, I looked at the list. I said, well, I'll check philosophy and religion because I'll just keep doing in college what I've already been doing anyway. This will just give me a chance to keep reading. I really didn't think I'm going to be a writer when I grow up. I had no interest in teaching whatsoever. I had no interest in anything except learning and figuring things out. So that's what I was up to. And I had 2 majors, one philosophy, one religion. And when I was a senior in college, it was obvious I was going to graduate school because I had to just keep studying. What else are you going to do if you have no vocational goal? And my philosophy professors, who were all atheists, it was very difficult being a philosophy major at my school. They told me, you can't go off to graduate school and study religion. That's just a waste of time. There's nothing there. You need to go major in philosophy and study epistemology. But I don't know. I disobeyed them, and I decided to do religion at that point. So it was a decision I made as a senior in college, and it was a decision because I didn't know before I made it what I was going to do, whether I was going off to study philosophy for an MA and PhD or religious studies.
Wow, that's interesting. You know, I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing now. In fact, I had no desire to teach in a university. I was a music major in undergrad. I played saxophone, and I decided I wanted to do some sort of music ministry. But I was just growing in my passion of reading the Bible, and I wanted to understand it. And pretty soon I recognized I needed to learn Greek. And I know that you can understand Scripture without knowing the original languages, but I was just so pulled in when I heard speakers talk about, well, the Greek says this, and it pulls out this extra meaning. And I thought, man, I got to learn it. So that got me into graduate school. I had to take some courses, get in on probation for a master's degree in New Testament studies. But I took as much Greek as I could. I just loved it. And at that point, I just knew I wanted to be involved in some kind of an occupation where I could teach the New Testament. And yeah, that's pretty cool. So what schools did you go to?
Well, I applied to several graduate schools, but I only wanted to go to either Yale or Duke. And I actually didn't care about Yale or Duke. By that, I mean, all I wanted to do was either study under Niels Dahl, who happened to be at Yale, and W.D. Davies, who happened to be at Duke. Today we have graduate students and they interview at different places and they visit the campus. They want to see the dorm rooms. They want to know about the environment, all this stuff. I didn't care about anything. I just wanted to study under one of these two people. And that was it. I didn't care where they were, what the school was, who the other professors were, or anything else at all. And Yale made my decision for me because Yale did not accept me and Duke did.
That was a big mistake.
And I went to Duke, and that's how I ended up studying with W.D. Davies. But it was just people. And I just knew them from books and articles I had read. And I thought, those are the two guys I want to work with. That's it. I never thought in terms of a school. Never. I didn't know anything about Duke or Yale. I didn't care.
So what was W.D. Davies like? What was it like studying with him? What kind of person was he?
He was the stereotypical absent-minded professor. It was very short. He was a Welshman. Very intense, and very hard to get to know. I was scared of him. I remember the very first seminar when I showed up for graduate school was on Matthew. And we had an old synopsis of the Gospels that at the beginning had the patristic testimonies to the Gospels, right? But all untranslated. The very first day of class, he said, open up and start reading. So he would just pick somebody, say, start reading Eusebius there, right? And of course, we're all just looking at the floor, hoping he doesn't notice who we are. But he expected us to sight read Greek from the beginning. So we were scared of him. Eventually, he became a good friend, a friend of my family, and so on. But he was a very kind person once you got him out of the classroom. But he was an intimidating presence, you know. He was also this sort of old-fashioned professor that expected students to take care of him. I literally polished his brass. That is, was invited over to his house to polish his brass pieces, and he had me drive his wife around and things like that. So old-fashioned academic aristocracy.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. It's interesting to see how these profs who are educated in overseas, just the different kind of customs. I know my friend William Lane Craig has told me that he had Wolfhard Pannenberg. He was his doctoral supervisor, and when Pannenberg walked into a room, all the students were expected to stand.
Like a judge at a trial, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't make my students do that.
What would you say is what was perhaps your greatest challenge during your either grad or doctoral work?
So it wasn't ideological. My greatest struggles were actually in college, where all my philosophy professors were atheists, and from my point of view, they were always attacking things that I believed or wanted to believe. So that was the big crucible. Once I got to graduate school, to the master's and PhD level, I'd already been through the ideological wars. So that wasn't the problem at all. The problem in graduate school was languages. So I needed to know Greek, like you, but I also needed to know Hebrew, but I needed to know Aramaic, and I needed to know Coptic and Syriac, and some Latin and French and German, and I don't know, 8 to 10 languages. And I'm not gifted at languages. I'm not that good at them. So graduate school was hard, but by far the most difficult thing was the languages. And I remember being terrified, truly terrified of language exams. I remember, for example, a final in Rabbinic Hebrew. You walk into the professor's office and he just pulled the Talmud down, some random volume from the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, and handed it to me and said, start reading. I mean, that's the final sight reading. So I usually went to sleep at 10:30 every night, but on nights before language exams, I was up late cramming because I hated it. I actually remember at one point thinking how hard this was. And I came, this sounds silly, but I came to some resolution. I have to think like a Roman Catholic rather than a Protestant when it comes to graduate school. This is not hell. it's purgatory, which means I'm going to get out at some point. And that's how I coped with this. I know I'm not here forever. If I were here forever, this would be hell with this language stuff, because I really had to work. I still do. And I've lost some of those languages also, I'm embarrassed to say. I'm just not a whiz at languages.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. I studied German, had about a year's worth of German before I got into the PhD program. But I like German. It was fun studying it. I like the way it sounds, and it was fun going to Germany and conversing with Germans over there in German. But I realized that it's not just learning the language. It takes a lot of effort to maintain knowledge, working knowledge of that language. And so I haven't done that with German. I don't think it's a good use of my time. There's just too much to do. We're working mainly with Greek in the New Testament, and I could probably spend that time a lot better, more efficiently if I'm just polishing my understanding of Greek. But boy, sight reading Hebrew, that's just, wow. Because a lot of the schools, they require, like, if you know French and German, you just got to take one semester of reading theological German or reading theological French. But wow, if you're having to sight read the Talmud, that's pretty impressive.
Terrifying.
I can see why you would think that was purgatory.
And I didn't do that well either. I mean, I had reasons to be terrified. I missed things. It didn't just flow out of me.
What led to you? You've written several books on the historical Jesus. What led to your interest in the historical Jesus?
Well, I suppose if I were to be honest, I could come up with 100 things, but I do have a couple of very distinct memories. So the first memory has to do with C.H. Dodd, and I'm pretty sure I was 19 years old at the time, and I was in a hotel in Iowa. I was there for a friend's wedding, and I remember sitting one afternoon on the bed in the hotel room reading C.H. Dodd's historical tradition in the fourth gospel. And I didn't want to go to rehearsal dinner. I wanted to sit there and keep reading this book, which totally fascinated me. By that time, I had enough Greek that I could follow that. And as I held that book in my hands, I remember thinking, this is what I want to do when I grow up. I want to write a book like this. So that book really captured me. Also, I have a second memory, and this has to do with Joachim Jeremias, but also a German scholar, Theodor Zahn. So one summer, now this was either the same summer, so I'm either 19, or the summer before, I'm 18. And I had a job that summer at an apartment complex where I moved a giant apartment complex, and I moved sprinklers. So you move one sprinkler, then the next one, you move all the sprinklers. By the time you're done, you start over and move the first one again. So all day long, all you're doing is moving sprinklers. And so I had all day long just to think, because it's a pretty mindless task. And I remember fantasizing. At that point, I had read Jeremias' New Testament Theology, Volume 1, The Proclamation of Jesus. And I remember fantasizing, when I grow up, I want to write a book on Jesus like Jeremias, and I want to write a commentary on Matthew like Theodor Zahn. And I look back at that little 18-year-old or 19-year-old kid and think, this doesn't really make any sense. I was just fantasizing. I was just dreaming. Somehow it happened. But again, it was simply running into these fascinating figures. By the way, I really did read Albert Schweitzer in high school. That didn't grab me, but Dodd really, really grabbed me from the beginning, and a lot of Jeremias grabbed me from the beginning. So that's how I suppose I got into this.
Wow. Now, you've had quite a distinguished career as a New Testament scholar. You've written quite a bit. What book would you say you're most proud of, that you're most pleased with? Bracketing this one that's coming out in a few months, which one do you like the most? So
I can't give you a straight answer to that. A lot of people, when they think about me, think about my Matthew commentary. When I think about myself, I never think about my Matthew commentary. So I wrote the first, it's a 3-volume commentary, and I wrote the first volume in my 20s, and then I wrote the next 2 volumes in my 30s. So I sometimes jokingly tell people the first volume, at least, is a piece of juvenilia. And certainly if I were to write those things again, they would be very different because I've learned so much. So I don't have a favorite book, but what I did realize recently looking at my books, and I just got a Festschrift, so that was the occasion to reflect and think about, where I've been and all that sort of thing. And I don't have a favorite book. What I really think, if I'm honest, and I was looking at my books lined up while I was thinking about this, my last 6 books are my best books. And the reason is the older I get, the more I know. So the more knowledge I'm able to bring to things. I also believe that as I've gotten older, I've become a better writer, and being a writer is really important to me. I don't like reading New Testament scholars who pay no attention at all to their style or to their sentences. So as I get older, I think I know more. Or I know more. So I also think, I hope I'm not deceiving myself, that I'm a better writer. By the way, I should add that I'm much more comfortable with writing books than podcasts. And part of the reason is that if I'm writing a book, I actually have a year or 2 years or 3 years to worry about every sentence in the book. And I'm constantly rewriting everything to get things just right. If I'm on a podcast, I'm just speaking off the top of my head, so I know I'm getting everything wrong. If I could go back and do it again, I would change everything. The forthcoming book on the resurrection, I've already had occasion to see 3 sentences that I would rewrite if I could now, but it's already in the production process. It's out of the editorial stage. But even working on sentences for 2 years or more, I sometimes don't get them exactly right. So anyway, that's the answer. I don't have a favorite book, but I don't think of myself as a Matthean scholar. That's just not there. I guess one other thing comes to mind. So if you were to ask me who I really am, I don't think it would be my academic books. If you want to know what I think about the most, or what I think are the most important things, they would be the things in Night Comes and in a book called Luminous Dusk, which is a book on spirituality in the modern world. Those are the 2 books that are dearest to my heart, that I recognize myself in more than anything else. As a scholar, sometimes you can just get involved in doing puzzles, kind of like a crossword puzzle. Sometimes, some of the scholarly stuff. But in those 2 books, everything is who I am.
Well, that's pretty interesting. I can certainly sympathize with the one thing you said about the books. You have a lot of time in order to ponder over how you're going to say something, whereas in a podcast or even in public speaking, sometimes you wish you could have said it a little differently. Because it might not even be exactly how you feel about something, but you're just speaking off the cuff. I know there have been occasions when someone has said, "You said this in this certain lecture that you did at this conference," and it's like, well, I couldn't have, because I don't even believe that, And it's like I go back and I watch the video, and it's like, wow, I did say that. How could I have said something that at a moment, I mean, you think that when you're speaking, it is reflecting your thoughts at that moment. But sometimes we say something and it's not even what we're thinking. And I don't understand how that works.
That's one of the reasons you and I are different. So I don't do podcasts and I don't do debates. I stay away from debates. I prefer, if possible, just to stick with the written word, or as much as possible.
Yeah, well, I can appreciate that and the reasons for it. Okay, so you're interested in the topic of Jesus' resurrection. You've written on many subjects, but why this one? Why the resurrection?
Well, so first of all, the obvious reason is it's central to Christian faith. And once I began in high school reading modern theology and modern biblical criticism, I realized that this was a controversial question. People had different answers about the empty tomb, different answers about the appearance traditions. So it became an area for me of doubt and questioning. I do remember in high school and early college reading a lot of apologetical works on resurrection, especially some of the older ones like Sparrow Simpson and James Orr, and not being satisfied with them. That is, they didn't convince me, even though I was inclined to agree with them. I'll tell you what really did it for me, what ultimately lies behind this book. So in college, when I was dealing with my philosophy professors, I found a lot of help in Wolfhart Pannenberg, and I read everything that he had written. And at some point in college, my second or third year, I remember reading Jesus, God, and Man, and there's a famous section in there where he discusses the resurrection, and he claims to show that it happened or that it's probable on almost purely historical grounds. And I remember reading that section for the first time and coming to the conclusion, this is a very vivid memory. And I put the book down and I stood up and I said to myself, what the heck did he just do? Did he really do what he claimed to do? If so, this is astounding. But maybe he didn't. And so I was in the middle of college. I didn't have time to investigate this full time, but I thought someday I'm going to come back to this, and I've got to think this through. So in my doctoral dissertation, I did have a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs on this topic. I just touched it briefly, had some preliminary thoughts. And then 2002, 2003, I got an invitation to North Park. Scott McKnight was there at North Park back then. And I thought, well, let's just do it. So I'll make the lectures on resurrection. And I gave these public lectures on resurrection with the intention of turning them into either a book or a very long chapter in a book, which is what happened. So ultimately, I think it was reading Pannenberg and not knowing what to make of him that really got me intensely interested in this subject.
Wow, I like Scott. He's a good guy. Well, man, this has been fun. So I think what I'm going to do, we'll stop here, and we'll cover some more about your book in the next interview, the next episode. So thanks a bunch, Dale, and yeah, we'll break this up into a couple of parts. So this has been interesting stuff to learn about your past and your childhood, what led you into this, and study about the historical Jesus and the resurrection. So thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Mike.